directed by Brandon Ullman. We are talking Sleepwalker, and this is actually based off a short also made by Brandon Ullman. And this one stars Hayden, Panettiere and Beverly D'Angelo. Now, the story focuses on Hayden Panettiere's character, who is a woman who is suffering from debilitating sleep problems. She is having nightmares, but more importantly, she's sleepwalking and looking like she's almost killing herself, like falling down the stairs and things while she's doing this. And the reason for this is because not that long before the story starts, her daughter and her husband were in a car accident, and the daughter was killed and the husband is in a coma. Now, the husband was abusive, so she's not too worried about that necessarily, but obviously she is grieving her daughter, and it is now living in this household, her remaining son and her mother, played by Beverly D'Angelo. Now, there seems to be, it could be, some external force, maybe some type of haunting that is causing these problems that seem to plague, well, as it turns out, not just her, but also possibly her son as well. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let's talk about it. What do you think works with Sleepwalker? Now, there have actually been quite a few movies based on sleep-related problems that are kind of horror films. This is but the latest one, but it's a fairly kind of well-made picture, I would say, and you could arguably say it's more of a thriller than maybe a horror, but I would put it in the kind of the horror frame, to be honest with you, because we are dealing with supernatural elements here. Now, the movie has a kind of a mix of what you're going to expect, but also a couple of like good ideas as well. So again, I'm not going to reveal any kind of plot points here, but there's an interesting element to this kind of like air quotes haunting that I think makes it somewhat unique. But it kind of plays like a somewhat like a typical haunting, but it has this kind of element to it that's maybe a little different from what you've maybe seen before. So I kind of quite liked it. I will say I think the performances are all quite strong. In particular, the standout for me was Beverly D'Angelo as the Hayden Panettiere's mother, and she's this kind of new age, grandma, and she's quite fun. Her character is actually very memorable, I have to say, and has probably some of the best lines. A scene stealer. But Hayden Panettiere does a great job as well, so there's nothing to take away from her. The movie does have a few kind of creepy elements, and it's one of these films which is you're not quite sure what's a reality, not quite sure what's a dream sequence, because obviously this movie is about nightmares, dreams, sleepwalking, so obviously you would expect to have a few kind of dream sequences in there. Now these things can be a little bit annoying at times, when I think sometimes movies do this too often, but I gotta say, because this is what this movie is about, I think for me at least it gives it a little bit more leeway. As we get towards the third act of the movie, there's actually quite a big conundrum that is offered up by Beverly D'Angelo's character, as she suggests, like, what is the worst least option? And I thought, wow, that really does kind of put the problem in a perspective. And again, when you see the movie, you understand the situation. As our characters are kind of at this point aware of maybe what's going on, but the action that is presented to them could end up making things worse. And I thought, wow, that is genuinely quite a conundrum, because it's pretty much uncharted territory, and what are these characters to do? So I kind of quite like that situation. Other than that, I would say the movie's perfectly kind of well put together and a kind of production value. You know, it's competently kind of directed. There's nothing flashy necessarily, and it does end up having a few cliche moments, which we'll talk about in a minute. But nonetheless, it's still like a competently made movie. You know, everything is where it should be. The audio and the kind of for the most part, the technical elements are all there. Which leads me to what doesn't work. I mean, arguably you could say there's a few too many dark scenes. I mean, it's obviously we're talking about, again, dream sequences, things that are happening in the night, so you would expect a lot of kind of like dark shoots, but then maybe, at times it's a little bit too dark to see what's going on. So the only kind of technical element I would say that I had a little bit of a problem with, but again, I think maybe you can give it some leeway because of the subject matter. Now, other than that, what can I say that doesn't work in this movie? Now, I'm going to be honest with you, I was actually kind of enjoying this movie quite a lot. A few kind of cliches, a few kind of like tropes that we've seen before, you know, typical kind of like haunted house sequences that kind of like you've seen in every movie. I think the what's going on is relatively obvious. You know, right, I mean, to be fair, they kind of reveal what's kind of going on relatively early, probably around the halfway mark, but I think it's more obvious before that, to be honest. I think it's, okay, you can probably guess what the situation is fairly easily. So, you know, maybe it could have been a little bit more complex in regards to plot narrative and things like this. However, there's the third act for me is where I feel the main problem is. Okay, so I have two problems with it. Number one is what it didn't do. So as I've mentioned, Beverly D'Angelo's character presents to us and Hayden Panettiere's character a conundrum, a problem that you don't know the answer to, because it's a bit of a wild guess about what is the best action to take. I'm not going to tell you what it is. And I thought, wow, that's genuinely quite an interesting problem to have, because it's unplanned territory. But they just kind of gloss over it. They don't really do anything with it. So to me, that was a massive missed opportunity, where the movie naturally presented this kind of great sort of plot point. We're thinking, damn, what are you to do? And then they just don't really do anything with it. Just kind of go on with it anyway. And, you know, never mind this kind of like, oh, you know, we have to kind of really consider this problem. No, it's just, they just kind of go ahead and do it. So that was a missed opportunity for me. However, where this movie really falls down is this movie wants to have a twist. And to me, this twist was the story element here that was massively misjudged. And I think actually undone a lot of the hard work that this movie has done up until this point. Now, how do I talk about a twist in the third act without spoiling anything? Let me try. Because this twist, I think, fails in a number of reasons. Okay, so we have a character decides to take quite a extreme course of action. The problem I have with that initially is that what is this character trying to achieve from this? It's not really clear what this character is trying to do with this decision that they make. Also, it kind of comes out of nowhere because it's a pretty serious course of action that this character is taking, and it would have seemed like the course of had this not have happened, events may have gone in their favour anyway. So it seems to be an extreme sort of reaction where it wasn't really sort of signposted, and it was unclear what this character was trying to achieve by doing this, and how it would have, you know, benefited them in the long term. Again, that's really all I can say without giving anything away. The second issue is the other character involved in this somehow decides they figured it out. And you're thinking, how? It doesn't make any sense that they would have just figured it out. Again, without really giving anything away, it wouldn't have happened. Someone, I don't think, would have just figured this out just on their own. Senses would have been dulled. It doesn't make any sense. But even if they did, let's pretend they did figure this out. The course of action that they should have taken was obvious from this point, but they don't do it. And instead it leads to a particular event. Now, again, without giving anything away, let's assume you are the second person I'm talking about, and you figured out, okay, this other person has done something. You would make what you are currently doing at this time, where you figured that out, you would make a somewhat decisive action about your current course of action of what you are doing at this precise moment in time. But they don't do this. They just carry on as normal, and inevitably bad things happen. It's just like, man, this whole sequence was idiotic in every way. And again, there's probably more issues, but I can't really say without really giving a game away. So to me, this twist, this movie wanted to have this twist, and it absolutely derailed, I think, what was up until this point quite a clever movie. And to make matters worse, it had a decent sort of conundrum, maybe not a twist, but a plot point that was, I thought, genuinely quite interesting that it didn't do anything with. Now, that's not to say this movie isn't a decent movie overall, because I think for the most part, it's actually quite an enjoyable, kind of haunting movie. With good performances, without being out and out kind of scary, spooky at the very least. And I think has some original ideas, even though it does end up having some kind of cliches. Unfortunately, as I say, the twist for me really undercuts what would have been a really decent movie otherwise. As it stands, I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. So an above average movie without really being a classic in any way. I'd be curious to hear any of your thoughts. Let me know what you think about this twist. And I'll look forward to you next time. Bye for now.